It was a dreary Tuesday night, the kind where the rain fell in sheets, smothering the city in a damp grey blanket. I was working the night shift as a taxi driver, cruising through the slick streets of downtown. My dashboard glowed softly, and the familiar hum of the engine was a comfort, but the air felt heavy, like a storm brewing just beneath the surface. The clock ticked toward midnight when my phone buzzed with a fare request. I accepted, and the GPS guided me to a dimly lit alley behind a bar. My instincts warned me to be cautious. This wasn't the safest part of town. As I pulled up, I spotted a figure standing under a flickering streetlight, their features obscured by the shadows. I rolled down the window. "Need a ride?" I called out. The figure stepped closer, revealing a woman in a long, tattered coat. Her hair was wet from the rain, and her eyes glinted with something unsettling, a mix of desperation and dread. "Yes, please," she said, her voice trembling. "Take me to Elm Street." I nodded and unlocked the back door. She climbed in, shivering, and I could sense a heaviness in the air as I turned the cab around. "You all right?" I asked, glancing in the rearview mirror. "I just need to get away," she whispered, staring out the window as the rain blurred the world beyond. "Long night?" I probed, trying to make conversation, but she fell silent, lost in her thoughts. The atmosphere thickened with tension, and I could feel something was off. As I navigated through the winding streets, the city transformed into a ghostly silhouette in the rearview mirror. I turned on the radio to fill the silence, but static crackled through the speakers, a sharp contrast to the stillness in the cab. I changed the station, but nothing seemed to work. The air felt electric, charged with an unease that settled deep in my bones. "Do you mind if I ask what's going on?" I ventured, hoping to draw her out of her shell. She glanced at me, her eyes wide and fearful. I saw something," she stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. "Something terrible." "Like what?" I pressed, my curiosity piqued. "Something in the alley," she said, her breath quickening. "I shouldn't have left the bar. I should have just stayed inside." "Hey, you're safe now," I reassured her, trying to sound calm, even though my own heart was racing. "Just focus on getting home." She nodded, but her gaze drifted back to the rain-smeared window. I continued driving, but the silence was suffocating, filled only by the rhythmic patter of raindrops against the roof. I turned onto Elm Street, a deserted stretch lined with shadowy trees. Suddenly her voice broke through the quiet. "Stop! Stop the car!" I slammed on the brakes, skidding to a halt. "What's wrong?" I asked, panic rising in my throat. "There's something back there," she screamed, pointing behind us. Her eyes were wild, pupils dilated with fear. I glanced in the rearview mirror, but all I could see was darkness and rain cascading down the glass. "There's nothing there," I said, though my voice faltered. The shadows seemed to shift, and I felt a chill creep down my spine. "Please, we have to go," she begged, her voice rising in urgency. I nodded and shifted the car into drive, but as I pulled away, I heard a soft tapping on the window. My heart raced as I turned my head to look. A figure stood there, drenched and gaunt, their face pale and twisted with anguish. It was a man, and his eyes were hollow, staring right through me. "Who are you?" I shouted, adrenaline surging through my veins. The woman in the back seat gasped, her hands trembling. "Drive! Don't let him in!" I hit the gas, speeding down the street, the sound of my tires splashing through puddles echoing in the night. The figure disappeared from sight, but the fear gnawed at me. "What was that?" I gasped, trying to catch my breath. He was in the alley," she stammered. "I saw him take someone." My mind raced. "Take someone? What do you mean?" She turned to me, tears streaming down her cheeks. "A woman. She was screaming. I thought it was just a fight, but then he dragged her away." The rain intensified, hammering against the roof like 1,000 frantic hands. I turned onto a quieter street, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being followed. The shadows seemed to stretch, reaching for us as if the night itself had come alive. "Just a few more blocks," I muttered, trying to keep my voice steady. As we neared the intersection, the lights flickered ominously, casting an unsettling glow. And then I saw it, the same figure, now standing at the corner, waiting. His gaze locked onto the car, and I could feel his presence like a weight pressing against my chest. "Keep driving!" the woman shouted, her voice cracking with terror. I didn't need to be told twice. I slammed the gas pedal, but the car hesitated. "No, no, no!" I cursed as the engine sputtered. The figure started walking toward us, his movements unnaturally slow, deliberate. My heart raced as I fumbled with the gear shift, desperately trying to coax the car into motion. "Please, I can't go back!" she cried, her panic contagious. Just then, the engine roared back to life, and I shot forward, my foot firmly pressed down. As we raced past the figure, I glanced in the rearview mirror and saw him stop, his face expressionless, yet somehow twisted in a grotesque smile. I pushed the car harder, my mind racing with thoughts of escape. Finally, I reached her destination, a small, run-down apartment building. I pulled over and she scrambled to open the door. Thank you," she exclaimed, her voice trembling as she stepped out into the rain. I watched her dash inside, relief washing over me, but it was short-lived. As I glanced back at the street, the figure was gone, swallowed by the shadows. I took a deep breath, trying to shake the lingering dread. Just as I turned to drive away, my phone buzzed with a new fare request. I accepted it, but a chill ran down my spine. Something deep inside me urged caution. Before we get into the next story, please make sure to subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon for upcoming scary stories. We need your support. You may also share our stories with friends and family. Thanks. It was a quiet Wednesday night when I slid into the driver's seat of my taxi. The neon lights of the city flickered in the rain-soaked streets, reflecting the solitude that surrounded me. Business had been slow, and I was hoping for a few late-night fares to keep me occupied. Little did I know that this night would unravel in ways I could never have anticipated. I pulled away from the curb, the hum of the engine my only company. The rain tapped against the windshield, a rhythmic lullaby that almost made me drowsy. Just as I was about to turn onto a less-traveled road, my phone buzzed with a fare request. The GPS led me to a rundown motel on the outskirts of town. As I arrived, I noticed the place looked almost abandoned, dim lights flickering and the air heavy with an unsettling quiet. A few drunks loitered outside, but they didn't pay me any mind. I leaned back in my seat, waiting for the passenger to emerge. My curiosity piqued. A minute passed, then 2. Just when I was about to cancel the ride, the back door swung open. A woman slid into the back seat, and I caught a glimpse of her pale face and hollow eyes in the rearview mirror. She looked disheveled, as if she'd just escaped from something terrible. "Where to?" I asked, trying to gauge her state of mind. "Just drive," she whispered, her voice barely above a murmur. I nodded and pulled away, the tires splashing through puddles as we left the motel behind. The silence stretched between us, thick and heavy. I glanced at her in the mirror again, and she was staring out the window, her expression unreadable. "Are you all right?" I asked, breaking the silence. She didn't respond, but I could see her fingers twitching nervously in her lap. Something was off. I turned onto a darker side street, the streetlights flickering like dying stars. The atmosphere shifted. The night felt charged, as if the very air was alive with unspoken tension. "Please," she finally said, her voice trembling, "don't stop. Just keep going." "Okay," I replied, a knot tightening in my stomach. The unease radiating from her was palpable, and I found myself glancing in the rearview mirror more often than usual. "Have you ever felt like you were being followed?" she asked suddenly, her eyes darting around the inside of the cab. "Not really," I said, trying to keep my tone light. "But I guess it depends on the night." She nodded, biting her lip as if she was holding back something, a secret perhaps. I turned onto a more isolated road, and that's when I saw it, a dark figure standing under a flickering streetlight, watching us intently. My heart raced. "Do you see him?" she gasped, gripping the seat. "See who?" I asked, trying to remain calm despite the chill running down my spine. "The man in the coat! He's been following me!" I glanced again, but the figure was gone, swallowed by the darkness. "There's no one there," I said, trying to reassure her, but my voice lacked conviction. "Just drive!" she screamed, her fear palpable. I floored the accelerator, tires screeching as we sped down the road. The rain hammered against the car, and the wipers struggled to keep up. Every shadow felt like a threat, and I could feel the tension in the air crackle. "Why are you running?" I shouted over the noise of the rain. "I don't know," she cried, her voice breaking. "He's after me. I need to get away." The streets blurred past us, and the headlights illuminated distorted shapes in the darkness. I turned onto a deserted stretch, hoping to lose whatever was chasing us, but the weight of fear settled in my stomach like a stone. "What does he want?" I pressed, desperate for answers. "He wants to take me back," she whispered, her gaze fixed out the window. "Back to where it all began." Before I could respond, a loud bang resonated through the car. Something had hit the trunk. I slammed the brakes, and the car skidded to a halt. The sound echoed in the sudden silence, and my heart raced as I turned to look out the back window. There, illuminated by the headlights, was the same figure, a tall man in a long coat, his face obscured by a wide-brimmed hat. He stood motionless, staring directly at us, his presence chilling. "Go! Go!" she screamed, and I punched the gas, the engine roaring to life as I turned the wheel sharply. The figure faded from view as we tore down the road, but I couldn't shake the feeling that he was still with us, lurking in the shadows. As we sped away, she began to tremble, tears streaming down her face. "I can't go back. I won't go back." "Where are we headed?" I asked, trying to regain control of the situation. "Just anywhere but here," she gasped. Suddenly she pointed ahead. "Turn left. There's a shortcut through the park." I veered onto a narrow road leading into a wooded area. The trees loomed like spectres, their branches clawing at the night sky. The car bounced over the uneven ground, but I pressed on, heart pounding, praying we could lose him. As we entered the park, the headlights illuminated a sign that read, "No trespassing." I hesitated, but the look on her face urged me to keep going. She was terrified, and for some reason, I felt compelled to help her. We swerved around trees and the air grew colder. Just as I began to think we might be safe, a sudden flash of movement caught my eye, a dark shape darting between the trees. "Did you see that?" I yelled. She nodded, her eyes wide with terror. "Keep driving." I pressed down harder on the gas, but the car sputtered, losing power. I felt the sickening lurch as we rolled to a stop in the middle of the deserted park. The headlights flickered and then went out, plunging us into darkness. "What's happening?" she cried, panic rising in her voice. "I don't know," I shouted, slamming the steering wheel in frustration. "Just hold on." Before I could react, the figure emerged from the shadows, gliding toward us with an unnatural calm. I gripped the wheel, heart racing as he approached the passenger side. "Let me go," she shrieked, trying to open the door, but I held her back. "Wait, just wait," I begged, but my words were drowned out by her screams. The figure stopped beside the car, leaning down to look inside. I caught a glimpse of his face, pale and sunken, with eyes that seemed to absorb all light. He raised a hand, and in that moment, everything shifted. "Let her go," he said, his voice an unsettling whisper. And then I understood this wasn't just about her. It was about something darker, something from her past. "Who are you?" I demanded, voice trembling. "I'm here to collect what's mine," he replied, his tone chilling. In a moment of clarity, she turned to me, eyes wide with recognition. "He's not just following me, he's part of me." Before I could process her words, she flung open the door and stepped out into the night. "No!" I shouted, but she stood firm, facing the figure with a determination I hadn't seen before. "Take me," she said, her voice steady, "but leave him out of this." I watched in horror as the two of them exchanged a knowing look. The air around them shifted, charged with an energy that felt almost palpable. Then, just as suddenly, they were gone, a gust of wind sweeping through the park, leaving me alone in the silence. The car remained still, and I felt a weight lift off my shoulders, but the emptiness remained. I sat there, breathless, trying to comprehend what had just happened. I had driven a woman into the arms of a darkness I couldn't begin to understand. Finally, I turned the ignition, and the engine roared to life. I drove away from the park, the glow of the city lights beckoning me back to safety. But the memory of that night would linger, a haunting reminder that some passengers carry shadows that are far heavier than they appear. Driving a taxi at night has its share of perks and dangers, and on this particular Friday, I was feeling the weight of both. The streets were slick from rain, glistening under the streetlights like the city was wearing diamonds. I had just finished a long shift, my body weary, but my mind alert, eager for one last fare to wrap up the night. As I idled at a red light, my dispatch radio crackled to life. "Driver 17, you have a pickup at the old cemetery on Oak Street." My heart sank. The cemetery? At this hour? But I was desperate for the fare, so I nodded to myself and headed toward the eerie location. The cemetery loomed in front of me, its wrought iron gates creaking in the wind. I parked outside, peering into the shadows. The air was heavy with a damp chill, and an unsettling silence hung over the place. I switched on my interior light, illuminating the dashboard and the anxious frown on my face. I could see a figure approaching, slender and ethereal, emerging from the mist. It was a woman, her long white dress flowing behind her like a ghost. I felt a strange mix of dread and curiosity as she reached my cab. "Are you my ride?" she asked, her voice soft but firm. Yeah, where to?" I replied, trying to mask my unease. "Just drive," she said, settling into the back seat. I caught a glimpse of her face in the rearview mirror, pale, almost luminescent, with dark circles under her eyes that hinted at a sleepless existence. I pulled away from the cemetery, the weight of her presence filling the car. As I navigated through the streets, I stole glances at her in the mirror. "What's your name?" I asked, attempting to lighten the mood. "Lila," she replied, her voice distant, as if she were lost in thought. "Nice to meet you, Lila. So where are we headed?" I asked, hoping for a clear destination to ground the conversation. "I need to go home," she murmured, her gaze fixed out the window as the city whizzed by. "Home? Where's that?" I pressed, curiosity bubbling inside me. She turned her head slowly, her eyes locking onto mine. "You'll know when we get there." A chill ran down my spine. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly off. As we drove deeper into the city, the streets became less familiar. The buildings turned into shadows and the neon lights faded behind us. "Are you okay?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. I just need to go home, she repeated, her tone eerie and unyielding. Suddenly she pointed to an alleyway. Turn there. I hesitated, glancing at the narrow path that seemed to beckon ominously. Are you sure? Just do it, she insisted. I made the turn, the tires crunching against gravel. The alley was dimly lit, the shadows closing in around us. I parked, my heart pounding. This doesn't feel right, I muttered. Let's go, she said, opening the door and stepping out into the darkness. Wait, I called, but she was already moving away from the cab, her dress trailing behind her like mist. Against my better judgment, I followed her. As I stepped out, the air shifted, the temperature dropped, and a strange fog rolled in, enveloping us. Lila! I shouted, trying to catch up. Where are you going? She didn't respond, her figure becoming more indistinct as she moved further into the shadows. I felt a rising panic. This couldn't be happening. I was just a taxi driver, not an unwitting participant in some horror story. Lila! I yelled again, but the echo of my voice was swallowed by the fog. Just then I heard a low whisper, chilling and disembodied. Help me! The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. I turned back toward the cab, but it was no longer there. Instead, I stood alone in the alley, the darkness closing in around me. My heart raced as I scanned the area for any sign of the woman or my taxi. Lila! I called again, my voice trembling. Suddenly I felt a cold breeze sweep past me, carrying the unmistakable scent of decay. A deep instinct urged me to run, but I was rooted to the spot. The whisper came again, clearer this time. Help me! Please! I stumbled backward, and just as I turned to flee, I saw her, Lila, standing in front of a tombstone, her back to me. The moonlight illuminated her figure, revealing a name etched into the stone. Lila Anderson, 1990 to 2015. I froze, realization hitting me like a slap. No, it can't be, I whispered. The woman turned slowly, her face now a mask of sorrow. I just want to go home, she said, tears streaming down her cheeks. I can't find my way. Panic surged through me. I took a step back, shaking my head. You're not alive? I know, she replied, her voice breaking. But I don't belong here. I need your help to find peace. I could feel my pulse hammering in my ears. What do you want from me? Drive me home, she said, her eyes pleading. I need to go back. I stumbled backward, my back hitting the cold stone of the tombstone. I can't help you. Please, she interrupted, her voice rising in desperation. You're the only one who can help me move on. In that moment, I felt an overwhelming urge to flee, but something about her sadness held me in place. I took a deep breath, struggling to maintain my composure. Okay, let's go. She nodded, and I turned, leading her back through the fog. As we walked, she spoke softly, recounting tales of her life, her joys, and the tragic accident that had taken her away. The further we moved from the graveyard, the more I felt an odd connection to her story, a shared humanity that transcended the veil between life and death. Just keep going, she urged, as we reached the alleyway's end. We emerged back onto the street, and I glanced around, my heart racing. The city felt alive again, but I knew I had to get her to where she belonged. Where's your home? I asked urgently. Just a little further, she whispered, guiding me along familiar streets. With every turn, I could feel her presence lightening, the sorrow slowly dissipating. Finally, we reached a small house at the end of a quiet street. It was unremarkable, yet a wave of familiarity washed over me. This is it, she said softly. Thank you for helping me. I glanced at her, the sadness in her eyes replaced with a serene calm. Lila, wait, I said, my heart aching. Are you sure you're ready? She nodded, her smile gentle. I am. Thank you for seeing me. Before I could say anything more, she stepped back, the fog enveloping her once again. I watched as she faded into the night, her presence lingering in the air like a bittersweet memory. I stood there, breathless, the city lights flickering around me. I'd just experienced something I could hardly comprehend, a connection to the other side. But with that came an understanding. Some souls just need a little help to find their way home. As I climbed back into my cab, the weight of the night pressed heavily on me, but I felt strangely light. I turned on the meter and drove away, the echoes of Lila's voice fading into the night, leaving me forever changed.